Hello, everybody. It is Friday at 5 p.m. That means you're watching Brew Bits right now. I'm here today with Jim Caruso from Flying Dog Brewery.
Yep.
I've never met him before in my life. I'm super nervous. And as always, Solomon's here with us.
What up?
Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors. Join Buffalo Wild Wings for Kids Day every Wednesday. Cartoons on the big screen, coloring contests, tablets, and kids' meals just $1.49 all day. Dine-in only. Only at your local B-Dubs in Frederick, Urbana, Rockville, Gaithersburg, and Columbia. Wings, beer, sports. You have to be here. So happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yeah, sick. I'm still recovering. I still got a really bad food hangover, so I'm like...
All the Thanksgiving things that we talked about when you were on vacation all happened yesterday.
Yeah.
We ate too much. There was always that family member that was too drunk.
Dude.
Like, you feel like shit the next day.
My wife's mother got hammered. It was awesome. She's so cute. It was good. So cute. Yeah, she got hammered. It was a good one.
So, Jim, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. So nice to meet you. Heather, is it?
Yes. So I've had the pleasure of working with Jim for over a decade now, and he is probably the weirdest person I've ever met in my entire life. Like, the weirdest. We actually, we say that he's an alien because of his sleep habits. Like, he does not sleep, ever. He's working all the time, Jim, why don't you give us this story that I've heard 1 million times, but you always tell it the best, just maybe an abbreviated version of the Flying Dog story.
Absolutely, and thank you for that introduction. A weird alien is perfect. Perfect introduction. The name Flying Dog, so it's George Stranahan, whose uncle invented the Champion spark plug and the AC Delco spark plug. It's 1983. He wants to go on a great adventure and decides that he's going to take 18 innocent people and climb K2. K2 is the only major mountain in the world without a name. It's the Karakoram Range. It's so distant, so remote, the person surveying it didn't think it would ever be climbed. It's never been climbed in the winter. George sets off in 1983, lands in Rawalpindi, Pakistan, finds a Sherpa that agrees to guide these inexperienced, untrained people up to K2. They set off. On day 19, they run out of alcohol and drugs. And this is a pretty serious deal because these are serious drinkers and druggies back then. George is not about to turn around. 31 days later, they're back in Rawalpindi, Pakistan at the Flashman Hotel. It's named after the British comic book explorer Sir Harry Flashman, the great adventurer. They're sitting in Gaylord Gwennon's room, and there's a picture on the wall, actually a painting, not a paint by numbers, but a beautiful oil painting of a dog in a position you've never seen it. It's almost like Superman with its forelegs in front of it, its ears blown back, its hind legs tucked up underneath it. They couldn't figure it out. The best guess was a local artist who didn't understand that there really weren't bird dogs in England. They probably heard the concept bird dog from the British who inhabited Pakistan during the Raj. Thought that dogs could fly in England. It is probably a local artist's misinterpretation of the English bird dog. They named it the Flying Dog. The first time in the English language those two words were put together. I've said this about 10,000 times. I've never been challenged. Google's out there, so I'm sticking with it. The first time in the English language, those two words were put together in a phrase. And it's just meant to signify, if somebody doesn't tell you that something's not possible or doesn't exist, you kind of let go of those limiting beliefs, and you can believe in a flying dog. That's the short version.
Or have the right amount of drugs on you.
Or have the right amount of drugs. Yeah, the funny part was they were oxygen deprived, alcohol deprived, exhausted. They were dying for a beer. They find out that Rawalpindi and Pakistan is a dry country. It's Muslim. They have to track down an attorney in the middle of the night. George has to sign an affidavit declaring that he is a Christian. They didn't care about his mom. Then they had to take that to a bar to get some alcohol.
That is sweet.
They're
God, if we
a
could
determined
still do
bunch.
that today.
The history of Flying Dog.
If I had $1 for every time I heard you tell that story, I would be...
Never the same, though. It's never the same.
No, it isn't. You always throw something in there that I've never heard before. So how did you get your start in the brewing industry and then with Flying Dog?
Sure, we'll keep this pretty brief. I've always loved beer. I've said this many times. My grandparents left Russia. They came through Ellis Island, and they called it the old country. And in the old country, the water was always bad. You didn't drink the water. So I got a little glass of beer with my Russian grandparents, and I loved it from the start. I was about 5 years old. It was great. Anyhow, after school and everything, I did some stuff in the public company world, and then in 1994 began acquiring and renovating historic buildings in core urban areas. And these are pretty big buildings, 20, 30,000 square foot, putting in pool halls, restaurants, bars, pretty blighted areas. But our solution was brew pubs, big shining tanks, and introduced the brew pub industry to core urban areas, San Francisco, Des Moines, Omaha, across the country, Colorado Springs, Denver, and that led to the brewery. And I learned how to brew in the brew pubs, which were very forgiving. Then I actually went to school to learn how to brew and found out how much I didn't know, and then we opened a brewery.
Siebel, correct?
The World Brewing Academy from the Siebel Institute, yes.
Great. So you brought something with you today.
I did. This is Stranahan's Colorado whiskey. So back in 2004, we had the opportunity to work with Jesse Graber to create Colorado's first ever straight whiskey. There was whiskey distilled in Colorado prior to this, but never by law straight whiskey, which means it has to be in oak barrels for 2 years. Our brewmaster, Matt Brophy, made this happen. To be a good whiskey maker, you have to be an excellent brewer, because whiskey starts with beer that doesn't have hops in it. So if you can't make good wash, is what it's called, you'll never have great whiskey. And this is superb whiskey. And this is from the original days in Colorado when Flying Dog was still brewing the wash.
Batch number 64.
Batch number 64 from my personal stock.
Okay.
So we'll be asking.
Crack that open.
Right now? No, it's our giveaway. Actually, I'm not big on whiskey. It's a little harsh for me, but this is probably the smoothest whiskey I've ever had in my life. But it's the giveaway today, so I'm going to ask a question later on in the show, so please pay attention to everything Jim has already said, but what he's about to say as well, and you might be able to answer that question. And you have to answer in the live feed, so studio audience, if you're not on watching, you'll have to hop on and answer it on there to win it. So that's
So
only
I think
fair way to do
something
it.
I like to dumb things down for people too that are watching, because a lot of our audience doesn't know a whole lot about the brewing community and stuff like that. So I wanted to pick up on one thing you just said about originally when we were in Colorado, because I think there's still a pretty big base of people that don't know that that's where you guys came from. So how did y'all,
Colorado. I barely remember it. But yes, we started in Colorado. Brew Pub in Aspen, Colorado in 1990 over on Cooper Avenue. The first brewery was in Denver, Colorado, the Silver State Laundry. Pretty decrepit building, but its claim to fame was back in the cowboy days when Denver was the gateway to the West, where you stopped in Denver to get your supplies before you went off to make your fortune in the silver mines. And Lawrence and Larimer streets were the wild streets with the saloons. And the Silver State Laundry, this building that we acquired, was the only laundry that could properly clean the dresses for the ladies that worked the saloons. So we thought that was so damn cool that we just had to have that building.
Yeah.
Had a
Some
second
grimy
brewery in
cleaning
Colorado
right there.
in 2000. And by then we were at capacity. We needed a bigger brewery. We came across the wonderful Frederick Brewing Company here in Frederick, Maryland, acquired that in 2006, moved all production out here in 2008. But Colorado is such a distant memory. For example, we have sold more beer almost in Maryland than we did in 48 states and 23 countries prior to moving here. So we've completely re-identified ourselves. The only craft brewery to move across the country, adopt new friends and neighbors, and have an entirely new identity. So we're very much a Maryland brewery, 100%.
Awesome.
A whole new community. Yeah. I mean, I'm from here. I love it. And
Wow.
you guys have
A whole new community
always
a whole new community to enable.
Yeah, exactly.
enablers. So Jim, you're like 100 years old, right?
In Earth years, more than that probably. Yes, a lot more than that. In Earth
Couple
years,
centuries.
yes.
That's right. So I wanted to get a little deeper into the discovery of beer with you, because you love to talk about this subject and you know a lot about it. And when I suggested history of beer, you said, "Well, I don't want to talk about like recent history of beer. I want to talk about like 4,000 years ago."
Yeah. So like your first memories.
Yeah, my first
4,000
memories
years
of beer
ago.
goes back to about 10,000 BC.
What is that first memory then?
First memory, about 4.6 billion years ago. I do like to tell this story though. So
The dinosaurs.
the first brewing on Earth, and I don't want to get into evolutionary biology, but if you believe the Earth is old, so this is pretty interesting. The first brewing on Earth was probably around 4.6 billion years ago. The Earth was just about 100 million years old, still smoky and dark and hot, full of toxic gases. And
You'd say that like you were there.
I gotta start making me sweat just thinking about it. So you have this situation where you have these toxic gases and lightning and thunder, and they're basically going up through condensation, getting blasted with lightning. They condense back down to the earth. This goes round and round, and this primordial, dark, sludgy pond develops. And it's literally brewing on this hot surface. And you have carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, possibly some CO2, the same ingredients that make beer. And out of this, after millions of years, come amino acids, which eventually lead to RNA, and about 4 billion years later leads to intelligent life. It's pretty amazing, really. So that's the first brewing on Earth. The first beer on Earth goes back a long time. A lot of people would say it's about 10,000 BC in the Sumer region, the Tigris and Euphrates. The reality, though, and this is how I like to dispel some of these myths, the reality is brewing and beer was popping up all over the world. China, Europe, even in America before the Europeans crashed the party, the Native Americans in the Southwest were brewing beer with maize. But sort of that history comes from the Sumer region between the Tigris and the Euphrates. And another interesting thing they say is that beer was the start of civilization, that as nomads had settled down into this agrarian farming life, that beer, which was discovered on these barley cakes they made it very convenient to settle down. Here's the myth. The more that is learned, that the nomadic life was a wonderful life. Fresh air, chasing animals, hunting them down. Settling down to farm was full of stagnant water and diseases, and it wasn't a very fun place to be. There's some reasons that developed, though, and beer actually made that life tolerable. It was discovered just because barley, which was in the cakes, yeast would settle on it, and when you ate that fermented bread, life seemed a little less harsh.
A little less shitty. Heck yeah.
Well,
And
I have always thought that brewing started in Egypt, and that's when you hear the women brewing in the kitchen. It was the women were the first brewers. What do you feel about that? What do you think about that?
Well, they were. Egypt, that Sumer region, yes. So you had, going back about 6,000 BC, is actually the first recipe, the written recipe for beer, even though beer went back long before that.
Excuse me for not knowing where the Sumer region was.
Well, no, but that whole area, so that the whole Samaria, Tigris, Euphrates into Egypt.
Yeah, I should have known that.
The women were the brewers. The women were, it was not easy to brew beer, especially with sanitation as it was, so the women were able to make very, very good beer. And that went on for thousands of years until the Catholics decided that they were going to be into the beer business. And as you may know, the Catholics back in the 800 AD or so wasn't exactly an equal opportunity employer. It was all men. So they decided that for various reasons they wanted to make brewing part of the monasteries, and the women were still the home brewers. The best beer was still at home, brewed by the women, but the monasteries took over brewing. About 820 AD, the first monastery that we know of, St. Gall in Switzerland, and that is the first known plan of a brewery. And then the monasteries went on after that to brew beer. There's something called the Rule of St. Benedict, and people in the brewing industry talk about this Edict of St. Benedict. It's actually a giant book of about 73 chapters. And the Catholic Church laid out all the things the Benedictine monks are supposed to do. And one of them, they say, was to do stuff good for the poor that you make with your own hands. Make food and wine and cheese and beer. And the second was to be hospitable to pilgrims and travelers. That's the story that you hear in the books. The real story was the monastic life.
Again, Jim was there.
I can tell you it was harsh. The real story was the life in the
Hard
monasteries was a very harsh life. The food was miserable, and monks loved beer. The daily ration for the monks was 14 bottles of beer. That was the daily minimum ration for monks. So it really helped you get through life. So that was a lot to do with the brewing tradition.
Doesn't sound so rough. Sounds perfect.
There are still, and what's happened over the years is that monasteries have now been authorized by the Pope. There are 11 authorized monasteries in the world today. 6 of them are in Belgium. You probably heard the names like Chimay, Orval, Rochefort, Westmalle, Westvleteren, Achel. But just recently, it's kind of interesting. The first monastery ever outside of Europe opened, monastery brewery opened in the U.S., about an hour west of Boston, St. Joseph Monastery Brewery. It's kind of a big deal. It was just sanctioned by the Pope in like 2014.
Wow, I didn't know that. I'm surprised I didn't know that. That one.
Weird, I didn't
Well,
know about
actually, Vec, who's out here in the
I was
audience,
trying to have some new material when I would do a show.
I'm surprised I haven't heard you say that before. So Vec, who's in the audience here, he's one of the hosts of another show on the station, and he's mentioned that you had, on our live feed, that you've already used like 50 words that he has no idea what it means. But Vec,
What,
I wanted to...
Catholic Church, religion? Well, which ones were you struggling with?
Catholic Church is definitely the one.
But Vec, CJ Tomich wants you to know that maize is corn. It's corn.
Maize, yes.
That's definitely what he was struggling with.
Corn, yes. Maize, it's corn, basically corn, looks like corn, tastes like corn. And throughout Central America and Southwest, it was used for beer. Yeah. And Budweiser uses it today. They call it corn. They called it maize back then.
And rice.
What was the other word?
What was the other word? No, I think you covered it. Thank you very much. So let's move ahead a few years and talk about the discovery of yeast. Maybe talk about Louis.
So we're talking about your college years now.
Discovery of yeast. Okay, well now we're back to the 1800s, pretty much modern times.
Yeah. So I mean that's still the way modern beer is made.
It is.
And it's controlled better now. But so Louis Pasteur is who's, I guess, credited with the discovery of yeast. Also, like vaccines and a million other scientific things that I would never, ever be able to wrap my brain around. But something tells me that Jim probably has a pretty good understanding of the discovery of yeast. I mean, it's just yeast. It's just a live organism.
Hey, so it's kind of like this. A lot of stuff you talk about in life, and I'm a scientist, a social scientist. My background's economics, a brewing scientist. But nobody really understands anything. If you're a true scientist, everything is probably, or for now, electricity. I can explain it to you in detail, but I don't know how it works. Nobody really knows how electricity works. Yeast and life, some of the greatest mysteries. Well, I was talking about this carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen. So yeast is just this amazing stuff. There are thousands and thousands of strains of it out there. Only 5% have even been identified at this point. Only 2 of those strains make beer: Saccharomyces cerevisiae, Saccharomyces pastorianus. Did you get that?
Vec,
Excellent.
do you know what that is? Okay, good.
Basically ale yeast.
Proceed.
Basically ale yeast and lager yeast. Good stuff. So this whole notion, this mystery of brewing is still quite a mystery. But if you go back to 1516, the Germans had this purity law, Reinheitsgebot. And here's one of the fallacies. It says that the only ingredients that you can use for beer are barley, hops, and water. The purity law. It says, well, they didn't know about yeast. They did know about yeast back in 1516. They had special guys. They weren't brewers. They're called Hefners that actually studied yeast and made it go in there. So they knew that yeast made beer and different yeast made different types of beer. But it wasn't until Louis Pasteur in 1857 discovered or really studied enough to know that yeast was a living organism, that when yeast was added to wort, sugar water, that it metabolized the sugars. And phase 1 is creating ethanol and CO2. That's great. And then phase 2 is this maturation where aromas and flavors are created. And Louis Pasteur identified all that, but here's what he really did. Beer, up to that point, would last a couple of days without turning to vinegar, very sour. And he discovered what it was that was causing beer to get sour. It was these living organisms and bacteria. And he applied pasteurization to beer so that beer actually became shelf stable. So yes, he discovered yeast, but he discovered something about it and fermentation, it being a living organism.
And I mean, that transfers through so many things in life that we take for granted, like milk and other things like that you just don't think about being shelf life on things, I mean, it's like
that's
before
exactly right.
then,
Yeah,
you're like,
yeah.
oh shit! Now we actually figured out how to keep a lot things longer on that table. So I think that was
Good old Louis, Jim's
Yeah.
friend from back in
and
the
that,
day.
and that's that's the cool thing is to think about how back then they were like so focused on the alcohol side of things that they were like, oh shit, it actually makes like other stuff that we don't get drunk off of last longer too. Like now we can drink milk like a week later.
Well, that's what happened. Lou and I were sitting at the bar having a beer,
Yeah.
and talking about his milk that he discovered. He was working a lot with lactose and sour milk. I go, hey, the same thing's happening to beer. Beer is as sour as the milk. He goes, yeah, well, it's probably the same thing. We'll just heat it up until we kill all the bacteria, and it won't go sour anymore.
Fuck yeah.
And he told you about all the times that they discovered vaccinations or made vaccinations for measles, mumps.
I do. I do hate to take
your-
credit for my influence on history. But
Yeah, okay.
It was there.
it was
Right,
there.
right.
It was there. Undoubtedly.
Well, I'm going to take a second to thank our sponsor. Join B-Dubs for Sammy Saturdays. Buy a regular Sam Lager and a burger for $12.99 all day. Valid on Saturdays. Only at your local B-Dubs in Frederick, Urbana, Rockville, Gaithersburg, and Columbia. Wings Beer Sports. You have to be here. That reminds me, we have a live show coming up.
We do.
December 8th.
It's going to be sweet, too. We're going to get hammered at Buffalo Wild Wings.
Well, there's Christmas IPA.
It's going to go down.
Snake Dog's on.
Yes,
I mean,
it is.
there's some good beers on tap. We have our sales team in town.
Yeah, so
So,
they're all going to come
It
out.
might get a little rowdy. I mean, they're from New York to, we have a ton in our state and Northern Virginia and DC, and so they're always really fun. So you guys should come out, join us for that. It's at 5 p.m. That's
At the one
December
in
8th,
Frederick.
Thursday,
Not
not
Urbana.
Friday. Yep,
Frederick.
at Frederick, not Urbana. Frederick, right off of 26. So we hope to see you guys there. So, Jim.
So one of my things, real quick, is I think one of my first memories of a Flying Dog beer was being so infatuated with the artwork and stuff like that. And I know everybody always wants to talk about Ralph and things like that, but back in those days, whenever you guys made that connection with Ralph or Hunter, however that happened, when did you get that moment where you're like, holy shit, this just really worked? Like, you looked at your beer labels, all of a sudden you were just like, oh man, this was the most epic fit ever. Because still to this day, no matter what new beer gets bottled of yours, the first thing I look at is the label. It's not the name, it's not anything else, it's the artwork on the bottle. And I think that's something that a lot of people, especially people like myself who started or got into the craft industry, more or less looking for a creative outlet or something that we kind of related with, rather than just a fucking Bud Heavy can that was sitting up there that your dad drank for years. So what was that relation for you, or how did that get started as far as, I don't know, I guess you could say the artwork up? I mean, obviously you told us the story about the Flying Dog, but
Where does Ralph come in the picture?
yeah, maybe, or just when did you find, as a business person, hey, holy shit, this really worked, because it definitely works. The art is one of the things that draws everybody.
You look at any brand, and there are people behind it. When you talk about companies and corporations being good or whatever, it's not a corporation; it's people. And this little band of people, this Granfalloon, as Kurt Vonnegut would say, this meaningless association of people that we call Flying Dog, has always been interested in art, edgy stuff, and obviously Hunter, a lifelong friend of George, neighbor in Woody Creek. Ralph had done the artwork for Hunter's books going back to 1970 all the way through 2005. And we were very fortunate that when we asked Hunter if he would ask Ralph if he would do art for us, that he said yes. And our goal, like many others, craft beer is liquid art, and we wanted real art on the labels. And if you go back to 1995, the craft beer industry was interesting and booming, but you didn't have true crazy art on there. We really opened the door
Right.
for that. And the first two labels were the Doggy Style Pale Ale and the Road Dog Porter. And we got them, and they were transparencies back then, not emails. And we just laughed our ass off. They were just so great and funny. Put them on the beer, and then we knew it was correct when the Colorado Liquor Commission banned the Road Dog label right from the start for saying good beer, no shit on it. Ralph was in his studio in Maidstone, loose-ended Maidstone.
In England.
In England, about an hour outside of London. About an hour outside
In the
of London.
Samira territory.
And the BBC was down there filming him. They were doing a documentary, as they did many times, and he was talking about his friend Hunter, and he was doing the Road Dog label. And Hunter was extremely generous and wrote an essay for the launch of the first beer with Stedman Art. And he said that a Road Dog, there were these aristocrats from the 1600s. They would ride down streets and smash in people's faces, put old ladies in barrels and roll them down cobblestone streets. And he finishes with this ancient Celtic axiom that says good people drink good beer, etc. So Ralph is saying good people drink good beer no shit. And so he splashed it on the label. And the Colorado Liquor Commission, after getting a complaint from one of our squeamish fellow brewers thought we would bring the wrath of the ATF down on us. So we ran Good Beer No Censorship for a few years, took that to the Colorado Supreme Court and won. But we knew it was a perfect fit. Not only did we love the art, but Colorado banned the first label.
Yeah.
So it was a match made in heaven. And it's very distinctive today. Ralph is 80. He's on his 50th book. He's illustrated hundreds of others. I haven't counted the number of labels he's done for us. He's doing one now, probably about 55 or 60.
Awesome.
So you've been in trouble a few times over the years for your labels.
We have, Heather. Yes,
I was
we have.
saying you.
You got us in trouble the
Yeah,
second
I'd say
time.
you guys are a pretty big advocate for the First Amendment.
We sure are. So, we did a beer for our 20th anniversary called Raging Bitch, and we've never used an advertising company. All of our labels have stories behind it. Snake Dog, the beer I've been drinking, it's our 20th anniversary for Snake Dog. I've been drinking it every day at the brewery since 1997. And
That's true. He drinks at least one.
At least one a day. Then I try all the others. So Snake Dog is named after a guy in Aspen who is truly the most despicable human being you'd ever meet. But all of our labels have those stories. It was our 20th anniversary. We had this amazing Belgian IPA. It's the gold standard for IPAs these days. We use El Diablo yeast, speaking of yeast. And we didn't have a name for the beer, so we're Googling names, and didn't come up with much. But El Diablo is a raging, aggressive yeast. It ferments 30% faster than you'd expect for a beer that's 8.3% alcohol. Bitch is a dog, raging bitch. We loved it. And Heather helped get us in trouble because we had the name for the beer. It was our 20th anniversary, and I talked to all the ladies at Flying Dog. The guys were all, don't do it. It's a bad idea. I'm like, I don't think you're the guys to know. Let's ask the ladies. And they all loved it. And Heather said something along the lines of, not only do I love it, but based on everything you've ever said, the way you talk, if you don't do it, I'll be forever disappointed in you. So there is some pressure.
True.
So we put the label on, and it became our #1 beer from the first month we introduced it, January of 2009. It's still our #1 seller today. Michigan rejected it. Hey, that's the way it goes. And it was a clear violation of our First Amendment rights. The 3 people on the Liquor Commission, elected officials, they're fine with fat bastard, arrogant bastard, backwoods bastard, badass beer. Anything with the name bitch in it, they just reject, even though that word's not even banned on daytime TV.
Let's get this straight. This is like 3 people sitting in Michigan that have they're not voted into office. They just have the authority to say, nope, you don't get to put your beer on the shelf because it says bitch on it.
Are they in Michigan because of M&M solely, or no? No. Okay, got it.
So, to make a long story short, it's kind of a humorous thing, and but I go up to the hearing, and they said, well, I want to assure you, Mr. Caruso, this is not about the First Amendment. I'm like, great, this will be pretty quick. Well, of course, it was about the First Amendment. This nonsense thing about it's detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Michigan. And I asked them, because I knew that they were banning everything with bitch, and I said, I'm just curious, did you ban a beer called Bitch's Brew by Dogfish Head Brewery that was put out in honor of the classic Miles Davis album, Bitch's Brew, that came out in 1969? And they said, well, we can't talk about prior cases. And I said, well, let me ask you this. I know you don't have the authority, but if you did, would you ban Bitch's Brew from being sold in record stores? And they said yes. I'm like, okay, well, game on. This is totally ridiculous. We sued them, won at the Federal Court of Appeals level, and that was a federal precedent that puts all liquor commissions on notice in all 50 states that the freedom of speech applies to beer, wine, and whiskey labels. But here's the bigger deal, as Heather just mentioned. These are appointed officials, regulators, bureaucrats. And if you've ever been the victim of some nonsense regulation or had your liberties infringed on, here's what it comes down to. Either you think that you have rights as a citizen from the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and government is there to protect those rights. That's what I believe. Or people in government sometimes believe that they're the government and you get the rights if they say so or not, that the Constitution doesn't apply. So every time we have this opportunity to push back and says that you're our servant and you're there to protect our rights, we do.
Yeah.
So the next time you get pushed around, next time you get pushed around by a
much.
bureaucrat, you know that we're on your side.
You push back.
Push back, and we're right behind you.
Hell yeah.
Heck yeah.
So going back to the history of beer, just a little bit, because I have some big questions that I've been waiting to ask, and I think you'll have a pretty good explanation for. So yeast is discovered, and now they have a little bit more control over beer. and pasteurization, and we'll be filtering, whatever you. So that all happens. Where do hops come into play? And were you alive then?
Oh, this goes back to, again, the early days, prior to Colorado. Go back to Europe, 800s. So hops have been around a long time. They were around in the 600s, 700s. In fact, that first monastery brewery, St. Gall, was using hops in 820 AD. I'm glad we brought this up. This is a good segue. Regulators. So hops are an amazing thing. They're helping to preserve beer, and they're adding lots of great flavor. But they're out of circulation. They're basically banned for 600 years because of the German equivalent of the IRS. Mm-hmm. The IRS was taxing. It was called Grutrek. It was a tax on Grut, and it was a secret blend of herbs and spices that were flavored beer and helped preserve it. And what happened is that the tax collectors didn't want hops to be a substitute for Grut because you couldn't control hops. You can grow them anywhere, and they can put them in the beer, and they'd never know. You had to buy this secret recipe from authorized dealers and put it in the beer. So for hundreds of years, it was limited to that, even though hops were an excellent addition. Then in the 1400s, like 1450 to 1650, the golden age of brewing. You have hops entering the scene. It's just a wonderful time with experimentation. Hops are a natural antiseptic and preservative, so prior to Louis Pasteur, it was used to help preserve beer.
Great. So now we've come to this modern time of knowing what yeast is and being able to control the beer and using hops. And so how many breweries were there when Flying Dog started? Just in the United States?
It's been a booming industry. So that's a great question. You know, if you look at the high point in breweries, about 4,100 back in 1888, the Prohibition comes along, just crushes the industry. 1978 is the low point, less than 50 breweries in the United States.
In 1978.
1978,
That's
yeah.
not that long ago.
That's my lifetime.
You were alive then. I was not.
Like 100
just
then.
so everybody knows.
Truly the low point. Jimmy Carter in 1978 signs H.R. 1337, which legalizes home brewing. Prohibition was over, but home brewing was never legalized again. He legalizes that. A brew pub starts up in 1978 in St. Albion, and then many more brew pubs. In 1985, there's still only 8 craft breweries in America, not very many at all. In 1990, when we had a brew pub, there were 269. So, you know, a relatively small industry. It's been booming. Now there are, nobody's really sure, probably close to 5,000. In the last 2 years, 3 brewing companies have opened every day for the last 2 years. More breweries have opened in the last 2 months than were in existence when we started. So it's a booming industry, and I think we're very fortunate. We're still in the top 50. We've always been in the top 50. I like to say that because there were really only like 50 breweries when we started.
Yeah. Always. It's always been in the top 50.
We've always been in the
Even
top 50.
Even though there were
always.
only 50. Yeah, so we're past the Prohibition time. So pre-Prohibition, there's 4,000 some. Now we're almost 1,000 past that.
Actually, in September 2015, we officially had more than 4,131 breweries.
That's so insane.
It's great.
So now there's all these sales going on, all these breweries. So I guess the best question I can ask you is, how in the hell does Ballast Point gets sold for $1 billion? They're a brewery that's only, twice our size maybe? Which is, in barrelage, if we're doing, they're probably around 200,000 barrels a year. And we're doing over 100,000. They get sold for $1 billion to Constellation. How, explain.
Jim, so are you a billionaire?
That's what I'm like, so Jim. We'll talk about your thoughts personally about Flying Dog on selling in just a little bit, but if you could explain that $1 billion price tag.
It's a great question. So if you think about this industry, I've heard a few references to there's a bubble in the craft beer industry, what's going to happen. Here's the deal. This is a relatively new industry. Remember, when we started 26 years ago, we're a legacy brand. There were 200-some breweries. I'm not even sure how many are still in existence. And now there's over 5,000. But here's the real defining element to that, and that is the people who started in the early 90s, the mid-90s, they've been in this business 20 years. And for many of them, they might not have a succession plan, somebody to turn the brewery over to. Maybe they just want to cash out. It's a natural cycle in the industry. And that's what you see happening with a few of these brewing companies selling to Heineken, Budweiser. Budweiser just bought 9 craft breweries. Constellation bought Ballast Point. Miller Coors bought Terrapin. San Miguel bought half of Founders. So it's
Who just bought Carbach? Somebody just bought
Carbach. That was Budweiser. This is number 10, number 9. So it's sort of a natural order of things, and some breweries are open to that, some aren't. The other part of it is.
So where do you stand?
We're not interested. I described this the other day. Somebody said, "Well, I heard that Budweiser approached you." I said they did, and I said, but our answer was kind of it was short form of no, thank you. We didn't even ask the price, and I'll tell you why.
No, thank you. Love Jim. Actually, it was that was 3 words. His real answer was 2 words.
Yeah, it was 2 words. But here's the deal: that I would have felt bad if they didn't approach us. Even if you don't want to go to the prom with somebody, you want to know that you're dateable, right? You want to know that they reached out, just so you could reject them. No, we're not. We're an independent brewery. We're not for sale, but some are, and. Sometimes it comes down to, well, this Ballast Point brewery that's about twice your size sold for $1 billion. Let me tell you something, and I was on an economics show not too long ago talking about this, that whether it's Budweiser or Constellation or Miller Coors or San Miguel, these are really, really, really smart business people. And a lot of what you hear is what they pay, and they turn it into some number, like they paid $1,500 a barrel or $110 a six-pack for the brewery. Almost every valuation, certainly in this industry, any industry, is based on either future cash flow or past cash flow. If you're a growing business, it's based on what you think is going to happen. Here's the story with Ballast Point. Ballast Point was about 250,000 barrels. Their last 2 years, they had grown at 80% per year. And they were able to tell a story that they're going to grow at a rate of 400% over the next 5 years. So this is what the value is based on. Now, if you could tell that story, it's a great story. So Constellation bought them based on this amazing story they had about the future. And when you calculate all that cash flow, it's worth $1 billion that Constellation will reap. Well, the reality is Constellation is doing great with this brand. They put a lot of money into it. They have a couple of breweries, and they're actually growing at a very fast rate. So that number is very much in line with other breweries. What happens is that you do that calculation, then you say, well, that sold for like $1,000 a barrel or $1,500 a barrel. That's just a derived number. It's based on cash flow. The better the story, the higher the price. And Budweiser has been buying breweries. What do I think about it? Look, if somebody wants to sell out, that's fine. The only thing that sort of bugs me is when they have a funny story about it. Like, I had to sell my whole company so I could grow it. I'm like, what?
I love the announcements that come out the next day where it's like, everyone's okay with it. Like, they understand. Everybody loves the idea of having more money into the brewery. And, like, you talk to the actual employees that work there in the industry, and they're, like, pissed. They're like, no one's fine with this.
Yeah.
We were told that if we leaked a word, we'd be fired,
Yeah.
Exactly.
So.
And from my side of things, like, especially Northern Brewer that just happened, them selling out, that was, like, from someone that, like, pays attention to homebrewer trends and stuff like that. Like, Northern Brewer was, like, devastating for everyone. And, I mean, it was just, like, like a very caught off guard type thing. So it's good to hear it from this, this kind of point, because not a lot of people hear it from this side of things, where it's like, oh, yeah, they sold out for this, and this is exactly what they wanted. It's like, there's always more to the story, and there's always, I think, an accelerated thing that kind of the media feeds to everybody, too. And it's simply, if you're going to grow 400%, then fucking grow 400%.
Sure.
Like,
I'm a free market guy. If you want to sell, if you want to build up your company and sell it out after 20 years or 1 year, go ahead. Just tell it like it is. And Budweiser, they're an extremely smart company. $40 billion. They're 4,000 times our size. They will produce this year about 400 million barrels of beer. That's enough to give a case of beer to every man, woman, and child on the planet, about 6 billion cases of beer. So if they want to buy out breweries to be in the craft brewing business, that's fine. I don't like it when I think they do things like predatory pricing or put six-packs out there that look like our brewery. I don't
like that either.
But, hey, they're a big company. Sometimes they do small things.
Yeah.
Yes, very small-minded.
Sometimes they think small.
So what do you think is happening to the quality of the beer at these breweries?
At the breweries that are being acquired?
That are being acquired, yes.
I think that's one of the biggest.
Anheuser-Busch's first acquisition was Goose Island out of Chicago. Goose Island was 60% owned by Greg Hall, 40% was owned by this.
Did you?
Oh, yeah.
To Justin Bonner of Jailbreak. He loves it.
Putting the goose. That's pretty funny. Yeah.
That's a good one.
So in 2011, Anheuser-Busch bought the 60% of Goose Island that wasn't owned by this other company. And they said, everything's going to be great. Nothing's changing. Greg Hall, the owner, will stay here. We're going to brew in Chicago. One of their best-selling beers is 312, the area code of Chicago. Well, fast forward 6 months, Greg Hall is gone. And 312 is being brewed in 970, Fort Collins, Colorado. It's still a very good beer. I mean, it's not that's bad beer. They're very good brewers, but it's a different story. You know, you're not going to see Carlos Brito, the CEO from Anheuser-Busch, sitting here talking about the beer. You see Jim Caruso or local breweries. So there's a very different dynamic with local companies versus big companies. And I'm not saying one's better or other. It's a different product, a different mentality, a different kind of company from local. When I'm here in Frederick and I see Will Randall, the owner of the Frederick News Post, he's a friend of the brewery. The news that he writes, I know that he lives the news. It's not just coming from a news feed, 1,000 miles away. So it's a different dynamic, and I'm very much into this. I was president of a public company for years. It's a different gig. I prefer this.
Yeah.
And I also feel that 90% of the population, when they're buying beer at the store, they're not thinking about, I bet the quality of that beer is not so good now that AB owns it. They have no idea. They really have no idea. It's, unless you're reading the beer rags or in the business and hear people talking about it.
I think that's slowly changing though too, because I mean there's a lot of more. I mean, this is coming from a big redneck. Like I live out in the middle of fucking nowhere, and I'm country as it gets basically. But it is hilarious to see now when I go hang out with some of the guys that I knew back in high school that we played sports together or whatever, and all of a sudden they're bringing out a craft beer saying, oh, hey, blah, 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 it's Berkeley Springs Brewing Company, and they got, a little handle of beer from somewhere. And I'm going, what? Like, you were shotgunning Michelob's, like,
yesterday.
Yesterday. And so I think that, like, 90% is changing. And I think that there is a big enough of a movement now. I mean, you talked about, like, that growth of where we're at, almost, like, 4,000, where we actually hit that mark back from the 1800s, and now it's like one of those things where people are starting to shift their ideals a little bit more to say, okay, wait a minute, I do know what's brewed in my backyard because it's in my fucking backyard. I mean, there's a reason I hire an HVAC company that lives right up the road from me, because I know that I can go get them whenever I need them. It's not the same thing that they're marketing all over the city. So I think that even though that might be a 90% that's going into the market now, I think it's changing rapidly. And I think it's changing because I see it. And I mean...
Well, I think it's especially in the younger crowd, the millennial crowd. They're just more aware and,
don't group me into millennials, first off. But second off, go ahead.
I think you're older than me. I'm pretty sure you're older than me.
Yeah, we're older than that.
No, they're just very aware of what they're buying and questioning everything. Like, is it organic? Good. Is it really organic? And they're looking up everything. And I mean, we're in Google is an amazing thing where people can have access to so much information.
I'm building a house, dude. That house is built on Google. Sick. I'll give it that much.
Yeah. So no, and disclaimer, that 90% number that I threw out was a total guess. Just off of talking to people. So, there's people that don't know Blue Moon's made by Coors. And Blue Moon's been made by Coors for, what are they, 10 years old now? I have no idea. But another just wild-ass guess right there. But, yeah, people just don't know and don't care. And I feel it's the older generation, like my dad, or like they've been
grouping you into this at all.
Well, he's 100, so he's not even in that generation.
Fantastic.
But no, these millennials are just so aware, and I feel like it will be a bigger deal as these guys become drinking age and older. They are at the drinking age now, so yeah. But
let me add to that too. I'm a free market guy. That whether it was drinking the beer at the monasteries in the 800s or when I was growing up in Ohio, I drank Rolling Rock. It was before craft beer. It was a fine beer. I'm not one of those guys that go, that's a bad evil company and a bad beer versus craft beer. They're different products. What I'm for is transparency. Coors has been making Blue Moon since 1995. Our brewery used to be 2 blocks from them. When they ran tight on capacity in year 1 at Sandlot Brewing Company at the Coors Field, we brewed Blue Moon for them. They're our friends. Coors Banquet beer is a very good beer made with all natural ingredients. It's just different from craft beer. So if you want Budweiser, more power to you. I don't like it when it's blurred, thinking, well, this is just like Jim Caruso and Heather's Brewery over in Frederick, Maryland. No, it's not. It's different. So if you want something that's from that kind of a brewery, be aware of it, and be aware if it comes from Budweiser.
Hey, if you want a fine light Pilsner, you should grab yourself a Miller Lite.
That's right.
That's right.
If you want a good craft beer, a good IPA.
And let's keep in mind.
It's no secret. We talk about all that. My husband only drinks Miller Lite unless he has to go to a brewery event, and he crushes Snake Dog, which is like the weirdest thing ever because you would think it would be the last one that he would pick up. But no, I mean, if you're looking for a light Pilsner, pick yourself up a Miller Lite. But that's just not what we do.
Again, there are different opinions. I'm all for transparency and Budweiser, and if I'm thirsty, I'll drink anything pretty much. If it's not water.
Yeah. Well, I have to take a second here to thank our sponsors. Come out Monday, November 7th. Never mind. Let's start that one over because that's past. Yeah. It's on the November list. Buffalo Wild Wings, best seat in the house promotion every Monday starting now through December 19th. Come out for the Monday night football game and get your chance to be picked up in a limo brought to Buffalo Wild Wings the following Monday night football game with $100 in free food and your chance to win one of 3 grand prizes at the finale on December 19th. Only at your local B-Dubs in Frederick, Urbana, Rockville, Gaithersburg, and Columbia. Wings, beer, sports, you have to be here. So, Jim, are you going to come out for the live broadcast when all the salespeople are in town?
Yeah, I think December 8th. I think so, yeah. I need to be in D.C. that night, but during the day I'm free.
Well,
I have a first
it's at 5, so
5.
So you're going to miss it. That's fine. We'll drink all the Christmas IPA.
I'll be defending your liberty and your future and your children's liberties.
Shocker. Shocker. So, did you have a good Thanksgiving?
I did have a good Thanksgiving, yes. 3 events, actually. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. 3 different venues. It was wonderful. Very relaxing,
Always so
very
proper
relaxing
business,
day.
like 3 different venues, 3 events.
Very relaxing.
Good. What did you drink yesterday for Thanksgiving with your Thanksgiving meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner?
Well, I actually had a big cappuccino with my breakfast, and then I had
Okay, fine. I'll take.
I had a Belgian beer for lunch, and I actually had Snake Dog for dinner.
Did it go good with turkey?
It did.
Yeah,
Yes,
I know
it did.
Snake Dog goes well with poultry.
I'm sorry, bitch. I had bitch. Sorry, it was bitch.
Oh, well, that does too. But Snake Dog is probably better with poultry.
Probably.
I don't know. Maybe. So all these breweries are getting bought up, and AB is becoming kind of a monster to everyone and I know you say it doesn't bother you. It doesn't. Is it more of? I get the feeling out there that people are just calling these companies banks now. That's what I'm hearing and getting the sense of other CEOs, people that own we are still a small craft brewery in comparison to even the 38 ahead of us in line here in America. So, I mean, how do you feel about them being called banks, and why do you think that they're being called that?
So, to your comment that I don't care. I mean,
No, you care. I know you care about everything.
I do care.
Literally every single thing.
From a free market standpoint, if somebody wants to sell their brewery and AB wants to buy it and you agree on a price, that's how it works. As far as why do I think AB is called a bank? Well, because they are. Because they're bankers that run the company. They're very, very smart people. They don't really care what they want to buy. They're a $40 billion company, and they want to be a $100 billion company by 2020. Beer works for them. They're also probably going to buy Coca-Cola or Snapple or whatever it takes to get those revenues up to $100 billion because, frankly, they're running out of big breweries to buy. So from a banking standpoint, this is an excellent investment banking play. By the time they cash out, there'll be many, many millionaires made in that company.
Right.
Yeah, when you look at the breweries on the map that they've acquired, it kind of seems like they're making a regional play everywhere.
Yeah, so my take on that, I couldn't figure out why they would buy a little brewery in Pacific Northwest or a little brewery in California. Well, I figured it out. It didn't take too long that none of the big macro breweries, Sam Adams, New Belgium, Sierra Nevada, were willing to sell to them. So they've done something pretty clever when you look at the map, I think. I'm not sure what their real strategy is. They don't invite me to their board meetings or consult me on this.
They should.
But it looks like they
should.
put together a nice strategy with regional breweries across the country, so they have a national presence. Probably see which ones work, and then
Yeah, you
work
look at
hard.
it, and it's like it's California, now Texas, Virginia, Chicago, and then Pacific Northwest.
Right.
I mean, it's just grabbed every little region that has enough population to
Yeah, once
make them a
Devil's
good amount of
Backbone
money.
went down,
Yeah.
I was kind of like,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, there was.
Yeah. Well, who all did they buy? They brought Elysian. They bought 10 Barrel. They bought Golden Road. They bought
Yeah.
Carbotch. They have Goose Island. They bought Devil's Backbone. They have Blue Point. Who am I missing? A couple of those. Yeah,
Blue
it's
Point, New York. Yeah.
sort of covers the country.
So on that, we had another good question that was like, what do you think about the layoffs from some of the bigger guys that haven't sold out yet, like Stone and guys like that? And what do you think that relationship is maybe to, you know, microbreweries and things like that, or is there a relation? Is it just, as they kind of word it to the media, just kind of like, hey, look, it's all good, we're still doing great, we just need to back off a little bit.
Everything's fine,
yeah,
and everybody's
because, I mean,
better than ever.
We brought that up, I think, maybe 3 or 4 episodes ago, right when Stone announced that, and we were just kind of like, oh man, they really spent some time on the wording on that. So what are your thoughts about that?
Hey, without getting too geeky on the economic side, it's like this. I've heard the word numerous times. They ask me, "What do you think about the bubble in the craft brewing industry?" Well, there is no bubble.
Yeah.
So what's happening here is that all these breweries have been opening. You have more capacity, more beer available than there is demand. So the craft brewing industry was growing at about 10 to 12%. It's now growing at 4 to 6%. Out of all the consumer goods companies, it's right at the top of the list. A bubble means that it would mean that, like, the housing prices have got to a point where it's ridiculously high for a house that the price has to come out. The price of beer is exactly where it should be. There's no bubble in the price of beer. So it's leveling out a little bit. All I can tell you about the breweries that are not doing, having a little trouble, the national breweries are getting attacked by all the little regional breweries. That happens. And the second is some breweries have held on to a winning strategy far too long, and it's taking time to change it. So when you hear them saying, well, these things happen in the industry, it's easier than saying, hey, we really held on to a strategy too long, weren't thinking ahead, and so forth, thought that a boom will last forever. No boom lasts forever, no bust. These are all basic principles that haven't changed for, 1,000 years, and it's not the dot-com thing where you had no revenue and no sales and a company worth billions of dollars. That's not what's happening here. But there is a little bit leveling out in terms of all the new breweries and how that's going to sort out taking sales from some of the bigger breweries.
I mean, a lot of it has to do with shelf space too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
that's being narrowed down a
go
bit.
into any liquor store now, and it's like, you can sit there and you got 40 options, and you're like, how? So getting down to it, I'm sure Heather's more used to this than I am, but getting down to it.
Yeah, I mean, shelf space, my favorite is in sales meetings when Jim talks about going into an on-premise account, which is a bar, and how you're not going to have an owner that's sitting there going, oh my God, I don't know what to put on this tap. There's not enough beers out there. Like, nobody's going to be asking you. Nobody's going to be just wanting you to walk in that door and save the day with, I have beer for you. They have enough beers. There's a billion of them. But yeah, shelf space. So what I feel is that the new breweries that are opening, if they are a local brew pub or a small brewery that wants to stay local and be part of that community, that they have a better chance doing that and just maintaining that as a restaurant, brew pub, being local, being part of the community, than they do trying to get to the size of Sierra, or the size of Flying Dog, or the size of even Devil's Backbone right now, which I think they're about the same size as us, currently.
Because there are a lot of mid-level brew houses for sale right now. I mean, if you go online, you can find them for dirt cheap, and it's been a lot of that trying to make that jump. I mean, you see it a lot.
Yeah, no, they're definitely trying to. There's some guys out there that try to make the jump maybe too quickly, and I think those are the guys that we won't see around forever. But if you just kind of let everything happen organically and just become part of your community and thrive off of that brew pub, that maybe one day, now we have so many customers that maybe we'll start distributing in Frederick, and then Montgomery County, and then just kind of branch out from there. But I think if you try to do too much too quickly. So I was at a meeting at Buffalo Wild Wings not too long ago, and there was a brewery before us, and I can't even remember their name right now, but they're brand new. And they were coming in to present to Buffalo Wild Wings, and I was right after them, and they're like, oh, this brewery that was just in here, they said we're just starting out, but we want to be just like Flying Dog someday. Literally talking about Flying Dog, like really big in the region, just a powerhouse, and makes lots of beer and makes lots of money and whatever. And I'm thinking, well, do they know how old we are? Because they literally just started months ago. They have a bucket in their garage type of deal is what I, felt from the conversation. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? I feel like the guys that probably try to do too much too soon are going to be the ones that fall off if there's ever. I don't think it's a bubble. I think there will be a shakeout, though.
That's probably a better word. When you have so many breweries opening, the weaker players, and some people are hanging on by their fingernails. You have to, this is similar to a lot of other industries. It looks easy to be on the other side of it. I mean, probably the only slight negative to this wonderful life that I have is when my friends, sometimes at Wall Street, go, well, you're a brewer. How hard can you work? You know, I mean, it's like, it looks so easy, like you just go around and sample beer, and it's quite hard. So for a few years, it's looked like the brewing business was the next get-rich-quick scheme, you know, that put all the money into it. Some people get into it for the wrong reason. Back in the 90s, there was nobody to turn to for help, nobody to ask about microbiology or anything like that. You just had to figure it out. And the people getting into it today, and they ask for advice, I mean, where do you start summarizing 25 years of experience? You know, it's like hire a QA person. Well, how much is that going to cost? Well, quite a bit. But without it, you're doomed. You know, market's not very forgiving about infected beer these days. And there is some bad beer out there, and I don't mean beer that I don't care for, that some of the people getting into it don't quite realize how hard it is, and some infected beer, some beer that has off flavors and defects to it, and it's unfortunate if this is your first craft beer and you taste it going, I can't believe there's so much talk about craft beer. This stuff tastes like vinegar,
terrible.
and it is. Or butyric acid, baby vomit.
We
Yes, that's what it tastes like.
Inconsistencies all the time on here, and things like that, and how it's just like one of those things as a craft drinker where you're like, man, you know, it's a massive difference in a craft brewery for someone that, you know, like me, that I drink craft not because I'm a brewer at all. I drink craft because I like it. I like the expression. I like everything else. But at the same time, I don't just drink it to go out there and flip a coin and say, hey, maybe it's good this week, you know? And I think that consistency and stuff like that, we've talked about it a couple of times, is so immense, because even with unfiltered beers and things like that we've discussed many times, many
East Coast
many
IPA
hotheads,
movement.
many hotheads, that you know will run over those things. So I think it's something where kind of the population is catching up and starting to hold people accountable, and I think that will be a real reason to see the true economics of things kind of like balance out, because it's not going to be somewhere where you can, like you said, a get-rich-quick scheme. Like, it's going to be somewhere like, okay, well, let's see your product. Just like on Wall Street. Like, you know, how many days on the dial are you looking? Like, how are we going? And I think that in itself will really, really create an industry that's a lot more bulletproof than it is right now. Because you can still go out and buy a really shitty six-pack. And I'm not going to name any names, but you can, no doubt.
And it's not the same shitty six-pack twice.
No,
It's a
like,
different
man,
kind
I
of shitty
swore
the
I
next
hated
time.
that last week.
Yeah. So we only have a few minutes left, and I wanted to get to that trivia question so someone can win this bottle of Stranahan's.
Oh,
Yeah.
Everybody get ready out there, because it's literally the first one to answer on the live feed gets this bottle. I'll bring it to you if I have to. But, so, earlier in the show, Jim was telling the story of Flying Dog. And they were in Rawalpindi, Pakistan. After their trek up the mountain, they went to a hotel where the famous Flying Dog painting hangs. What is the name of that hotel? It's it's painted on the wall at the brewery. You said it twice. I mean, I did. Are you watching it, Solomon? Anybody?
I am. I'm watching it.
I can't believe literally if you work for Flying Dog and you're listening right now and you can't answer this. Jim.
That's a little scary.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. I don't know if you're fired, but
sure,
but
most people
Jim's
have tuned
gonna
me,
have a very long
tuned
talk
me
with
out
you.
years ago.
Flashman.
Yep. Who said it?
Dylan.
Oh, there you go.
Sweet.
That is the answer.
Well,
that is the end. The
someone
Flashman
in-house,
Hotel.
So that means we get to drink half of it.
And Jen's been wanting to drink this the entire time, so you better give her some.
Named after Sir Harry Flashman, I believe.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Jim has, so this interview doesn't even do Jim justice, and I joke and I say he's 100 and he's weird, and that just shows you what type of boss he is, that I can sit here and joke around, and
just tell him the truth.
And you're an alien, from Clune. That's a whole different story. He has the best stories. I mean, between him and George and Hunter and our other owner Richard, who is just a hoot. I just sounded like I was 70.
Man, that was
just quite a hoot.
That was a very old thing of you to say right there.
I know, you even looked at me like,
I was like, I don't know
Heather,
about
are you
that
okay?
one.
Well, I think I'm 100 now also. No, he's just a really great person and a great brewer and a wonderful boss. And he is always interesting. And we're so glad that you could be on the show with us today. So thank you for coming out.
Well, likewise, you're interesting and great to work with, Heather. Thank you very much. I really appreciate
wasn't
it
me
for being
fishing
here.
for compliments,
And
but
to our
thank you.
partners, Buffalo Wild Wings, great, excellent company. Hope I can be there on the 8th. If not, I will be there some other
It's
time.
okay.
But
It's
thank you
okay.
very much.
You'll be fighting for our freedom. So
Yes, as always.
Thank you.
I
for
will.
freedom of
Always.
speech.
That's right. Heck yeah.
Let me thank them one more time. So boneless wings are just 60 cents every Monday and Thursday, all day, only at your local B-Dubs in Frederick, Urbana, Rockville, Gaithersburg, and Columbia. Wings Beer Sports, you have to be here. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. It's
Yeah,
Friday
guys.
at 5.
Give it up for the audience.
This Friday after Thanksgiving. I know it's a rough one. You don't feel good, and you're probably hungover, and you still came and drank beer with us. So we appreciate that. We just want to do one more cheers. We always do a cheers at the end of the show.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, Brew Bits. Happy holidays.
Yes,
We're
guys.
out.
Send the love out to your